Hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming to Flyleaf Books to hear Mike Duncan talk about his book, Hero of Two Worlds, as we celebrate its paperback release. This event is being live streamed thanks to our friends and partners over at Carolina Public Humanities. Mike Duncan is one of the most popular history podcasters in the world and author of The Storm Before the Storm and Hero of Two Worlds. Lloyd Kramer is a professor of history and director of Carolina Public Humanities at UNC Chapel Hill. We will be wrapping up a few minutes before 7 and the store closes at 7. I encourage you to continue any conversations you may have after the event at the beautiful root cellar patio outside. But nicely. But I really hope you guys enjoy, and thank you so much for supporting your local indie. Thanks.
Okay. Maybe I'll just stand up to do a brief introduction. I want to welcome everybody to this event, and I want to thank Flyleaf Books for hosting this conversation with Mike Duncan. As Morella explained, I'm Lloyd Kramer. I'm a professor at UNC Chapel Hill. And I'm also director of Carolina Public Humanities, which is co-sponsoring this event. And there are brochures on the back table if you're interested in learning about our programs. And we often collaborate with Flyleaf Books. I also just happen to be the author of an earlier book on Lafayette, which I'm not in the running here for a competition, but I am so honored that the subject continues to attract attention. I am not going to talk about my book, but it is available in obscure bookstores. Yeah, I mean, it rocks, but this is a real deal.
I meant to bring my copy.
Oh.
You can see just how absolutely destroyed and doctored.
Well, thank you. He said he. Okay. Anyway, the point I want to make is that Lafayette introduced a lot of people in the 18th and 19th century, and this legacy of Lafayette introductions has continued because that's how I met Mike Duncan. So, thanks to Maggie Robe and Morella Bruzal for their work in organizing this event here at the bookstore, and thanks also to Vicki Breeden and Paul Benici for their work at Carolina Public Humanities. Paul is managing the technology, and I want to welcome all of you. We have a very large audience also on the live stream, so welcome to this event. Let me just point out that we are going to talk about Lafayette's life, actions, and historical era in Europe and America. And I want to remind you that Lafayette lived between 1757 and 1834, just to remind you of his life. And he participated in many events on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean. So our visiting author is Mike Duncan, and as most of you know, he is a well-informed historian and popular podcaster whose series of podcasts on the history of ancient Rome and the history of modern revolutions have attracted many thousands of followers throughout North America and beyond, and I think some of them are in the room here with us tonight. Mike has an exceptional ability to interpret complex past events in knowledgeable, concise, and accessible historical discussions. I should mention that he was born in Washington State and completed his BA degree in political science at Western Washington University. He also studied philosophy, and he became a baseball fan in Washington State.
Yeah,
and
a baseball fan.
Even before he was a philosopher or historian, okay. But, well, he can't resist throwing in some ideas, and here he is with his mic on now. So but in recent years, he's lived in Paris, and that's where he completed his work on this important book, which is called Hero of Two Worlds, the Marquis de Lafayette in the Age of Revolution. I think you know this is his second book-length study. He wrote this earlier book, The Storm Before the Storm, about the history of the Roman Republic between about 150 and 75 BC, right before Julius Caesar and the collapse of the Roman Empire, of the Roman Republic, which gave way to the empire. So you see, he loves crises. That's why he's so knowledgeable. His new book on Lafayette is part of a renewed interest in Lafayette that has developed over recent decades, perhaps because so many people are looking for leaders from the past who favored political reforms and social projects, but rejected political extremism and the authoritarianism of people like Napoleon Bonaparte. So to put Mike's achievements in the framework of the contemporary humanities, we could describe his work as an outstanding example of how historians can connect with audiences and communities outside the academic world while also drawing on the valuable methods of careful historical scholarship. And his best selling work on Lafayette is an example of that talent. So we're very pleased to welcome him to Chapel Hill. He's on a tour going around many different cities and states like Lafayette did in 1824-25. He's going to begin with some comments on how he happened to write this book. Then we're going to have a little conversation, and I'm going to ask some questions, and then we're going to open up the floor for questions from the audience. So, Mike, you've got your microphone on.
I don't
Take it away.
know that I... Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so can I do the thing where I go, hello, and everybody laughs, right? Okay, we're doing the thing where I say hello and everybody laughs. That's great. That's the icebreaker here. That was so many nice things you just said about me. Lloyd wrote a tremendous book about Lafayette. He's underselling himself a little bit, and it was certainly one of the first 3 books that I picked up and read about Lafayette. It might have been the first one that I read, and I think probably the scope of your book will influence a little bit of what I'm about to say, which is like how I came to decide to write a book about Lafayette, which is. It comes from the podcast, obviously. This is sort of the origin point of this. And when I started the American Revolution, I knew that I was going to go on and do the French Revolution. And so there were several figures involved in both of those that I wanted to pay particular attention to. Lafayette is, of course, one of them, another one being Tom Paine. Right, so I spent a lot of time and a lot of attention to Tom Paine, and there might be a Tom Paine book in me at some point because Tom Paine was a hell of a writer. His prose stylings are very, very good, even if he was perhaps not as likable as our good friend, the good Marquis. But so I'm paying attention to Lafayette, and it's a nice little story about this teenager who's run away from home and winds up in Washington's tent and gets adopted and all that good stuff. Then when he goes over to the French Revolution. The thing that really, the first time that I was like, this is so interesting, this guy, is that when you read studies of the American Revolution, especially by like Anglo and English-speaking authors, it's Lafayette, what a great guy. Lafayette, what a hero. Lafayette, oh, so wonderful when he came here. He played such a great role. He's a great guy. And then you start studying the French Revolution, and you're listening to French historians and their comments about Lafayette, and the adjectives change completely. It is now, what a bumbler, what a fool. There goes Lafayette, asleep at the switch again. And you're like, whoa, this is 2 completely different stories of exactly the same human being, just from different perspectives, in different contexts. So this gets my wheels turning a little bit about that Lafayette might be more interesting than just sort of your run-of-the-mill historical figure. But I know, along with sort of the collective consciousness, that once Lafayette departs the French Revolution, once he gets kicked out in 1792, that's kind of the end of his career. There's not much to it after that. He was great as a teenager, and then in his early 20s into his early 30s, he's a big deal. And then he's done, and he goes off, he retires to a farm someplace, and then he comes back for this tour of the United States in 1824 and 1825 as a sort of like relic of the past, the last living major general, and he goes on this big farewell tour, and it's nice. But those are kind of the 3 constituent parts of his life, with that tour being a real sort of like long, far-off epilogue to the story. Which then, as I proceed through the Revolutions podcast, which I'm moving chronologically through the age of what you might call the age of revolution or the age of democratic revolution, I'm doing Spanish-American independence, and I'm reading a biography of Simón Bolívar, and suddenly there's pages and pages of correspondence between Bolívar and Lafayette. I'm like, whoa, okay, Lafayette is still somebody who matters, that somebody like Bolívar is writing to him, and sort of Bolívar is looking for recognition and legitimacy for what he's trying to do in South America. And Lafayette is very happy to offer him that legitimacy and recognition and say like, yeah, we consider you, the South American Washington. Here's, we put together a package of gifts for you. Here's a pair of Washington's pistols. And then when I wrote the book, I went back and I read all of that correspondence in more detail, and you can really see the tenor of the conversation changing as Bolivar gets more and more frustrated that people won't do what he wants them to do. And so he becomes more and more autocratic and dictatorial. And so Lafayette is, at the beginning, he's like, you're so great, we're all rooting for you. And then by like 1829, he's like, dear General Bolivar, what are you doing, man? Like, we're not supposed to be doing dictatorship. Like, this is about liberty. Like, what is going on down there? And Bolivar didn't respond to that. So this is cool, but obviously, so now I get a window into Lafayette as like an international figure of sort of reform and liberalism, that he's in correspondence with Polish revolutionaries, with Greek revolutionaries all through this age. They're all sort of looking to him as a clearinghouse of information and support. And in reading that, I kind of caught a glimpse of, oh, he is still involved in French politics a little bit here. I didn't quite understand that. And then when I got into the Revolution of 1830, which, when it comes to what revolutions did I know a lot about going into the show, Russia. That's why it was 103 episodes, you guys. I'm really sorry about that. And 1830 was one that I didn't know a ton about. And I knew that Lafayette was going to play a role in that revolution too. But the image, sort of the conception that I had in my head, is that he's an old man. They cram him back into his old National Guard uniform. They put him in a wheelchair. They roll him out on a balcony. He waves to the crowd. He plants a Republican kiss on Louis Philippe's cheek, and then they take him out again. And he's literally just a prop. But as I went through the like sort of the year by year, month by month, day by day lead up to the Revolution of 1830, it finally dawns on me that no, Lafayette has been involved in French politics. He's been in the Chamber of Delegates. He's been a key member of the liberal opposition all through this Restoration period. Like, he is still one of like the leading figures in French liberal politics. He didn't retire. He didn't go anywhere. That is sort of like we've forgotten about this part of his life. And then, of course, after 1830 is over in the show, in the podcast, I did all those supplemental episodes, and I wanted to do an episode about the Carbonari, the Italian Carbonari, which I thought was such an interesting movement. They're trying to, stage these liberal revolts to get back kind of what the French Revolution had done. And I'm reading this book about the Carbonari, and Lafayette's name starts showing up all over the place in here too. And I like flip back to the index, and it's like Lafayette, and it's just like number, comma, comma, comma. And some of them are like 196 to 203. Like, how is this guy so involved in this? And it occurs to me then that in the early 1820s, that he's not just involved in these Carbonari conspiracies, he's running it out of his house, because he's got parliamentary immunity and the police are not allowed to search his premises. This is one of the reasons why like he becomes one of the inner circle members of this. It's hard to tell exactly what went on, because I'm assuming they had a rather large bonfire when the revolt against Louis XVIII failed, and he went off to the United States for 18 months to maybe cool his jets a bit. So now I'm looking at a guy who is not just, he's a teenager, he had youthful exploits, he got kicked out of the French Revolution, but this is a full 50-year-long career that is fascinating. People can't agree on what Lafayette means. Some people love him, some people hate him. And this is right when The Storm Before the Storm came out, right as I'm writing those episodes on 1830. And the publisher is saying the first book did well, what would you like to do? I said, I want to do something on revolutions. And I got to tell you, there's this guy, Lafayette, and I can't shake him. He keeps showing up. He's been involved in more seasons and more episodes. This is before Russia, right? I think Lenin has finally like maybe surpassed Lafayette in having appeared in the most number of episodes, but certainly the most number of seasons. Lafayette like set that record, and it's an unbroken record. And so I go, so it's great, and people think he's just a teenager. But really, the second half, he has this, crazy, complicated relationship with Napoleon Bonaparte. He's in the room when Napoleon abdicates. He tries to get Napoleon like a passport to go live in America. Which, can you even imagine, like, if Bonaparte had wound up in America living there? And he was so involved in the Revolution of 1830, and right to his dying day in 1834, he's still involved in liberal politics. And they look at me and they're like, "Are you talking about the French guy from Hamilton?" And I said, yeah, I'm talking about the French guy from Hamilton. And they said, well, go write a biography about the French guy from Hamilton. What are we doing? Like, why are we even talking about this? And so the thing is, I worked really hard on that book proposal. You know, like it was detailed. I was really laying out a case that Lafayette was somebody worth talking about. And it turns out that I could have sat down and in 2 minutes written on a piece of paper, I want to write a biography about that French guy from Hamilton, slid it across the table, and they would have just given me a check. So that's where all this comes from, and God bless Lin-Manuel Miranda. I'm pretty sure he bought me a house.
So maybe the next thing you can do is you can make a Broadway show out of Lafayette.
Yeah, I mean, like we'll see. I did write a 12-song punk rock opera about the French Revolution.
Oh my. Okay.
That's a thing that happened.
So I think
It's coming, you guys. Revolutions is almost over.
so I think it's great how you show this long career of Lafayette, because so many people in America don't really know what happened to him after the American Revolution. But what do you think was Lafayette's greatest achievement throughout his long life, and what do you think was his greatest failure as a leader, as a human being?
Well, I think I would say that his greatest achievement, I think, was it Chateaubriand? Was it Chateaubriand who said this? That was, he had the idea of his age, that the things that he came to believe in the 1770s and 1780s about sort of liberal civil rights, liberty as a concept, equality as a concept. He was somebody who took equality as seriously, I think, as he did liberty. And these were kind of the animating ideas of the age. And they were, I think, in a positive way, and this is me, I'm editorializing a little bit about my own politics. I'm not an unreconstructed traditional Catholic who thinks that 1789 was a huge mistake. I'm in favor of a lot of the things that they did, even if I'm not in favor of all the methods that they used to achieve it. But Lafayette was somebody who had those ideas that I think did a really, really great job reforming some of the things that needed to be reformed in order to move towards what I would call today a more just society. I don't know if you can look at society today and say, yes, this is a just society that we're living in, but I do think that it is a more just society. And the thing that I think I sort of admire the most about him is that he never stopped. That's what he never did retire, and that's when I start to get really, really interested in him. Is he dealt with some setbacks in his life. He was nearly killed. He winds up in solitary confinement after being arrested by the Austrians. He nearly dies in prison. There were so many roadblocks that were put in his way, and so much opposition to what he was trying to do. And he just sort of woke up every day, I think, with a sense of, this is the world as it is right now. I think that there is a better version of this world that we can make, and I'm going to try to make that happen. Because he's also somebody who I never find, he's not somebody who puts a lot of faith in providence, or just like, let's just sit back and let the force of history take care of things. Like, things just keep getting better, but we don't actually have to work to make them better. I think that Lafayette is somebody who took very seriously the notion that if you want to make things better in your world, that you have to make it happen, that you have to spend money and time and attention and take big risks, which he did. And sometimes he succeeded and sometimes he failed. But yeah, I think those are the things that I admire about him the most. And I think by the time that he's dying in 1834, I think that he could realistically look back at where society and civilization started from when he was young, and where it was by the time that he was dying, and say, like, well, I think a lot of what I was trying to do worked.
If that's the case, why do you think the French are so critical of him? They must see him as a failure in some way. Not all French, but many.
The vast majority of them.
So why do the French view him so differently than we view him in America?
Well, I think they're wrong.
Sacre bleu.
Yeah, I know. My read on what's going on with Lafayette in French historiography is they do treat him like a bit of a dunce and a bit of a clown, a bit of somebody who was very much in over his head, which I think, some of it comes from just the position that he was in during the French Revolution, like during the heyday of the French Revolution. Like, he was not a journalist. He was in the National Assembly, but he wasn't really like he wasn't like a parliamentarian in that way. His specific role was head of the National Guard. That's who he is. He's the head of the National Guard. And what does the National Guard have to do? Keep order in revolutionary Paris while also sustaining political liberty at the same time. This is like an impossible job. I think I'm not sure. So like some of the things that people ask me, like how would the French Revolution have been different if Lafayette was not there? I mean, is there anybody who could have done that job well? Yeah, go ahead, man. There's mobs running amok. It's up to you, dude. And I think he actually did a pretty good job. But if you watch, sort of him being unable to hold the line of liberty and maintain order at the same time, and he does collapse by 1791. You get the massacre of the Champ de Mars, which I don't think is Lafayette going out there looking for blood, but it's something that got out of hand. And a lot of people wound up getting killed by his soldiers, and he is as the leader, he has to take responsibility for this. And so the French are mostly focused on those early years of the French Revolution, which is a lot about him starting from this glorious, famous heights, and then when tested, failing. Okay, but how many French revolutionary leaders passed any kind of test in the French Revolution? Like, not many of them did. So that's a lot of where I think sort of their notion of him, because they don't give two. This is a family show.
We're on a
Remember
live
that
stream,
we're
yeah.
on a family show, so don't curse. They don't care about the American Revolution. They don't care about what he did when he was over here. They care about him kind of for those 3 years. And one of the things that I would remind them when I would talk to people, like I would, go to the library in Paris, the Histoire de Ville de Paris, which is right there by the Carnavalet Museum. And I was asking for some documents, and they were like, "What are you writing about?" I'm like, "Oh, I'm really interested in the French Revolution in 1830." And they said, "Well, what's the topic of your book?" And I said, "I'm writing a biography of Lafayette." And they said, "Well, of course, you're American. You're the only people who ask for these documents. Nobody else cares about these documents." But like what I try to remind them of is when Lafayette died in 1834, it was a big deal. The Louis Philippe and Louis Philippe's government were very concerned coming out of the June Rebellion of 1832 that Lafayette's funeral procession through Paris would be a trigger for another revolution, because he was such a popular figure. There are descriptions of this by both conservatives and liberals of hundreds of thousands of people coming out into the street for Lafayette's funeral procession. So when he died, he was a very big deal and considered very popular. His reputation as the years went by deteriorated, and now they thought I was writing a biography of the guy who started the department store gallery,
Yeah.
which is a real thing.
So his fate in France is really affected by French historical arguments that may not have that much to do with Lafayette himself, but with
100%.
Let me ask another question. You've done a lot of important work on the Roman Republic and the crisis and collapse of the Roman Republic.
Yeah.
What do you see as a connection between what you've learned about the collapse of the Roman Republic and what you've learned about Lafayette? Do you see connections between what the French went through in the Revolution and Lafayette went through and what the Romans went through?
Boy, that's an out of. I'm going to think about this for 1 second.
I think I found a question that doesn't have an easy answer.
What Lafayette and the collapse of the Roman Republic?
Well,
where
did the French take away from Roman history? Maybe.
I mean, they were cosplaying Roman Republican history. They were all taught it, and we talk about this, and I talk about this in the book because it comes up a bunch, that it's just absolutely crazy that this absolutist monarchy is teaching an entire generation of school children how great Brutus was. Like, what are we doing here? And like, so they were reading all of that Roman Republican history. But I will like, okay, so Lafayette during the Roman Republic, during that collapsing period, is absolutely with the Senate, right? I think that it would be undeniable, because one of the things that Lafayette opposed, and I think he gets this a lot from Washington. I think this is one of the key things that, like, when we talk about Lafayette modeling himself on George Washington, is he has this real detestation of permanent dictatorship. He doesn't like permanent dictatorship. He likes a president, but he likes it for a limited amount of time, and he likes it to be an elected thing. This is why he sort of detests what Bonaparte gets up to. So I think that Lafayette would be somebody who, as somebody like Julius Caesar is coming around, he might even be talking to Caesar in the same way that he talked to Bonaparte, which is like, there's a lot of good in what you're trying to do, and a lot of your ideals make sense. Your methods are poor, sir. You shouldn't just wage war against everybody, which Caesar also did, although Caesar would be like, well, they made me do it, which is exactly what Napoleon said, which is exactly what everybody says. I didn't want to do this. This is about the defense of me and my country and my nation. But I do think that Lafayette winds up on the senatorial side, ultimately defending those institutions, even though he would have been on the liberal side of that. I don't think he would have been somebody who would have looked at the way the Roman Republic was running prior to Caesar's arrival and saying, oh no, everything's great here, like we don't have to reform anything. He wouldn't have followed the Gracchi line, because Lafayette's not somebody who really wanted to promote popular violence in support of his values. And there are a couple of times when he's going out. There was one time in particular, right after the Revolution of 1830, when a bunch of his own supporters are kind of these young Republicans are mobbing where the Chamber of Delegates is meeting, and they want to force a more liberal constitution on the post 1830 settlement. And Lafayette goes out there to tell them to go home. You know, he's not out there saying, "Oh yeah, let's do this thing. Let's storm the Capitol. Let's get our way by storming the Capitol." That's not something that Lafayette would have agreed with. And so, okay, so where does he winds up in Athens?
Oh, okay.
There you go.
There's
I
a
finally
good
got
answer.
there. What happens
So,
to Lafayette?
you know,
He winds up in Athens,
is,
kicking it with that. Oh, what is his name? Who's the guy who was friends with Cicero? Does anybody remember?
friends with Cicero?
Yeah, the guy who was writing all the letters to Cicero, who just hung out in Athens through everything. He was the smartest man alive.
But he's dead.
Oh, he's he's been dead for 2,000 years.
I,
Oh, yeah. How smart is he? He died.
he didn't solve that problem. So actually, it's interesting because a lot of people accuse Lafayette of wanting to be Caesar. You know,
Dude, that comes. Yeah, it's really true.
when
and
he
it's-
was head of the National
for
Guard.
sure.
But let me ask another question. You talked about his failure during the Revolution, and a lot of historians say it was because he was a kind of centrist.
Yeah.
So we live now in a time of extreme polarization, sort of like during the period of the French Revolution, although we're not quite as violent yet. What do you think his story tells us?
I believe in us.
Oh, okay, well, but what do you think his fate, because he ends up, as you say, running for his life and ending up in solitary confinement. What does his story tell us about how to survive as a democratic society in a time of extreme polarization?
Right.
Are centrists doomed to failure?
If they try to be centrist, yeah.
Do you think he's a centrist?
No.
So why is he not a centrist, and why does he have to run for his life if he's not?
Well, he had to run for his life because him and Danton didn't get along with each other, and Danton
Yeah.
was settling old scores. So Lafayette is not a centrist because when I think of what a centrist is, like when I'm going to define this as a political term, it is somebody who is taking a look at the political milieu as it exists and saying, here's the right, here's the left, here's the middle, right? And that's where I'm going to stand because to the extent that there is a nobleness to a centrist mentality, it is trying to bridge all divides and close all gaps and be like, you know, we all live in this place together. So even if there is this wide variety of sort of ideological opinion, if we stick to something close to the middle, it's the shortest possible distance to get everybody on the same page is being a centrist. And Lafayette was not a centrist in that way. Lafayette had his values. He believed in things. He cared about things. And there is even somebody could pull this up because when I read this quote, I slapped it in the book so fast. It was practically the speed of light. I got this in the book where he was giving a speech. I think this is in 1832, and he is criticizing Francois Guizot and the policies of the juste milieu, which is that policy to a T. Like Guizot was trying to settle the post 1830 political settlement with that kind of mentality. And Lafayette gave a speech to the Chamber of Delegates where he said, you know, what is this policy, the juste milieu, where one person says that 4 + 4 is 8, and another person says 4 + 4 is 10, and so I will say that 4 + 4 is 9. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
4 + 4 is not 9 just because somebody else says 4 + 4 is 10. So he's in the middle because there is a more radical left that is to his left, and there is a more radical right that is to his right. But he's not somebody who was trying to position himself in between everything. And so I think that in that way, centrism is ultimately a hollow way to do politics, because you're waiting for other people to have opinions and then just trying to situate yourself between it, where but now it's no longer the shortest distance. It's nobody wants anything to do with you because you're not saying what they believe in. You're saying some version that is shaded in one way or the other. And I think that Lafayette had real values. I think that he believed in the things that he believed, and if that put him in the center, then he was in the center. If it put him on the far left, which he was on the far left sometimes, you know, like after the Restoration, and if sometimes he's a reactionary dog who needs to be run out of town because Marat now has power, which then he's going to get run out of town that way. But yeah, I don't think that his centrism ultimately led him astray. I think it was his somewhat naive belief that he didn't need to build a large coalition in defense of his values, as everybody else was building coalitions and parties and factions. He was like, no, we'll just do the thing where we get together as enlightened individuals, which is, I think, some of his naivete. Like, he believed like the things that Jefferson and Madison were saying about enlightened individuals coming together, and that's how you do a republic. And he believed that and didn't realize that Jefferson and Madison were busy building the very first and very most effective political party that the American Republic had seen, in between writing letters about how political parties were terrible.
So you bring up Jefferson and Madison, and this raises one of the big controversies about American history, slavery.
Slavery?
And there's been a lot of debate about whether Lafayette did enough to try to end slavery. So I want to ask two questions about human rights. How do you see Lafayette contributing to the struggle against slavery?
Okay.
And for women's rights? Do you see him being ahead of his time on either or both of those subjects?
Well, he is nowhere on women's rights. We can do that one first. And to the extent that you guys, where's your book? Hold up your book again.
I didn't ask to do this, but here it is, ladies and gentlemen. There's
Yeah,
the
man,
book.
it's literally a chapter called Lafayette and the Women, right?
That's right.
Okay,
That's why
yeah.
I'm asking about that.
It's a really good book, Lloyd. So I think that we would agree that Lafayette was progressive in the sense that he is not somebody who's like, I am the man and the father, and like, you know, the king is the father and this is a patriarchal society. Somebody who thought that women were inferior in any way. He had lots of really good long, not just like he's having affairs, of course, in addition to his very good relationship that he has with his wife. But he, which is all true. Yeah. You guys are snickering, but it's true. And Adrienne and Madame de Simeon became friends after the Revolution.
That's right. It was a very open-minded attitude.
Yeah. It was very hippie stuff going on in Lagrange. So he has these great relationships. He when all of his letters to Madame de Simeon, I think Gottschalk maybe noticed this, that it was kind of strange. These are not love letters that he's writing. Like, a lot of this correspondence, it's not like, oh, I can't wait to see you again, I love you. It's like, here's the recent political developments, what do you think? And they're in sort of a conversation about sort of the serious issues of the day. But do we find Lafayette out there championing the Declaration of the Rights of Women, or being out there talking like a ton about how, like, oh, you know, if we're going to do voting rights for everybody and suffrage, like, what does universal suffrage mean? I don't think we encounter him saying that women should be included in that necessarily. And I think that he would have gotten there. You know, I think that he's in an ideological stream that if you kind of like detach him, if you give him like a Lazarus pill and let him live for another like 70 years, that he starts reading John Stuart Mill. because he is in correspondence with Bentham, and he's in correspondence with James Mill. He's like close with those guys, and so I think eventually like he'll be reading John Stuart Mill and being like, oh yeah, right. But during his lifetime, no, I wouldn't call Lafayette a champion of women's rights in any like meaningful way. Slavery is, I think, a very different thing, and I think from very early, we find him being a champion of abolitionism, a champion of emancipation. It's something that he not only sort of believed privately in his heart, but he put time into it. He put his face on it, like if an abolitionist society wants to, put out a poster or something that has Lafayette's face on it, he's like, yeah, do that. I want to be associated with this movement. I want to spend my time and attention on this movement. And, he's somebody who, like, in all the things that he wrote and said, I didn't even really find him being, especially in like the pre-Civil War era here in the United States, there's a lot of like abolitionists who are like, we need to free the slaves because it's inhumane, but then we need to get these lesser people back to Africa, right? There is sort of that same, like, there's a very racist part of it, but they're borderline like animal rights activists, and it's kind of gross to read some of what they say, even though you're like, yeah, like, of course, like, you're doing the good work of fighting for the end of slavery, but it's not because you think that black people and white people are like equal. And I think that, like, especially in the books that were written about his tour that Levasseur wrote about the tour, they lay out the case in that like a bunch, that the reason why we find inequalities between the black population and the white population in the United States comes down to education and like material capabilities. Like if you're uneducated and you don't have any money, then yeah, you're going to be living what appears to be a worse life and an unequal life. But they said straight out, like when they were down in the South, like to the white people who were making this case to them that slavery is good because black people are inferior, they would say, well, what would happen to you guys if after 3 generations nobody educated you, nobody gave you any money, and they treated you with complete degradation? Do you think that you would wind up, exactly where you are now? Because he did believe, I think, in equality in that way. But does he always come through in the end? Does he always follow through in the end when he buys the plantation in French Guiana with the intention of educating his slaves, of paying them wages, of ending corporal punishment, to prove that you can have a plantation run by a free black population? Does he ever wind up doing it? He doesn't. 1789 comes along, and that takes up all of his attention. He kind of gives the project over to Adrienne, and she is doing kind of the real management of it while he's running around out there. And then by the time that all the slaves are emancipated in the French army in 1794, Lafayette's in an Austrian dungeon. He's got nothing to do with it. And then the other thing that does, it goes in the book because I want to talk about Lafayette as an abolitionist, and I want to talk about his role in ending slavery, of which I think he did. He was one of the most famous abolitionists of his day. When he comes out the whole other side, and he's been released, and Napoleon is now in charge. I think this is pre-Empire, so this is the consulate period. And Napoleon is trying to get Lafayette on side. Like, he's trying to get Lafayette to say, what Bonaparte is doing is the fulfillment of the French Revolution and the things I believe in. And he knows that Lafayette is broke. And so he says, like, when all of your property was seized during the French Revolution, like, we actually still have the title for your plantation in French Guiana. And what we can do is we'll just go to a law office, and we will recognize your claim to that property as valid, and then we will immediately buy it back from you, like, for money. And Lafayette says, okay, this is great. This is a good way for me to sort of get some money back in my bank account. And Lafayette himself said while he was in the room, this is when he realized that Napoleon was going to reimpose slavery on the empire, which had been abolished in 1794. Because the contract said that he was giving up his rights to the property and all people contained therein. And he was like, oh no, he's going to reimpose slavery. But does Lafayette now, with all of his principles, with all of his beliefs, with all of his association with abolitionism and care about slavery, does he say, no deal, I'm walking away from this? No. He signs his name on the piece of paper, he takes the money, because he's a fallible human being. And he needed money. And in that moment, I think that if you were to ask Lafayette on his deathbed in 1834, did you do the right thing in that moment? He would have said, no, I did not. based not on our values today, or not based on even off of values at the time, but based off of his own values. So, you know, would I put him on balance as a positive force towards ending slavery? Yeah, absolutely, you betcha. But was he perfect in that execution, and did he do it even in ways that that are wholly laudable? The answer to that is no, because he is a human being.
He was a human being.
He absolutely, and relatable in that way. You know.
So I want to open up to see if there's some questions, either from the audience in the room or if Paul has any on the live stream. Because I could ask more questions, but are there
No.
any people
So
here?
the deal is
There's-
they all come with burning questions. They've all been
Okay,
listening
so
to the
everybody in
podcast
the room,
for
let me
years.
see
They're
if
being
is there
weirdly
anyone here?
reticent.
Did you have a question?
Yeah.
Okay, so speak up, and then I'm going to repeat it so the people at home can hear you, or hear the question.
I mentioned this to you earlier, but I was surprised by all the revolutions out of Haiti. I've never heard any of that before, and including Lafayette's involvement there in a little bit, if I remember correctly. And so I was just wondering what, well, I guess why you didn't include that in this, as far as I can tell, although it would have killed the title.
So the question is, what about the revolution in Haiti in the 1790s, and why isn't that discussed in the book?
Right. Okay. So the revolution in Haiti is going on mostly when Lafayette is locked up in an Austrian dungeon. And so he does come out the other side of that, and this is the point at which he is broke and he's kind of out of politics. And so to the extent that I talk about his relationship to Haiti, because one of the things that I did think was really interesting is that in the 1820s he is in correspondence with I think Boyer is who it is. I forget exactly which president of Haiti it is. He's in correspondence with Boyer, and he is, from his position as a liberal member of the government, or excuse me, of the parliament, to have France recognize Haiti. In a way that, this is when Charles X is up to the emigres billion, and he's trying to extract this reparations payment from Haiti before the French government, which then was imposed on Haiti, and is one of the reasons why Haiti winds up the way that it is. Which Lafayette took the money for that too, which I was also not too keen on. But like, his accountant submitted all the paperwork, and he was paid not just for the property that he lost during the Revolution, but also for the slaves that he had owned, which he took.
But wait, he didn't have enslaved people in Haiti.
No, he didn't have enslaved people in Haiti. I'm drifting.
You're going
we're,
back
we're,
over
we're,
to
dri-
Guyana.
we're drifting now off topic. But what didn't make it into the book, and was probably just like a crunch time decision that I didn't probably realize how permanent this decision was at the time, was that there are stray mentions of Lafayette talking about Haiti. He was not wholly thrilled with what happened in Haiti. He is a reformist. He's not somebody who wants to see a lot of violence moving things forward. And so he looked at the Haitian Revolution as something that was like a warning to what will happen if we don't do emancipation the right way. He was a gradualist. He wanted slow and steady emancipation, as opposed to one cataclysmic upheaval, and he considered it to be the violence and the bloodshed. And I think he probably thought of the Haitian Revolution as a tragedy in that way, as opposed to something that was really to be championed and celebrated. And of course, you hear this from him, and you're like, well, if we've decided that slavery is bad, then how do you ask anybody to stay enslaved for even one single minute longer? Just to say like, well, we'll get to you in 20 years, even though we know that this is a grotesque abuse of human rights. What are you actually asking people to do? And is Lafayette right to call the Haitian Revolution a tragedy? But he did consider it a tragedy, and there is a line about that, and no, it didn't make it into the book, and it's probably something I regret. Thanks a lot.
Is there another question? Question over here. Yeah, go ahead.
Modern political figure that you think most reminds you of Lafayette?
Is there a modern political figure who most reminds you of Lafayette?
Is there a modern political figure who most reminds me of Lafayette? I mean, is it Obama? Like, it might be Obama, but he gives off centrist vibes. I'm trying to triangulate a middle ground here. Who's somebody who, as sort of the waters ebb and flow, kind of sticks to his guns, but is never really on one side. Like, does anybody have a good example? I'm not really.
Somebody who never changes? What about Bernie Sanders?
Yeah, but he's on the.
Oh, he's too far to the left.
Yeah, he's a stalwart on the left. Yeah.
Jimmy Carter.
Jimmy Carter?
Jimmy Carter.
You know what?
That may not be the ultimate compliment, but
Which was it? Oh, yeah. No, it doesn't have to be American. It's not Macron. None of those dudes. I think actually Jimmy Carter is actually like a pretty decent guy. I was at the Carter Center yesterday. That's where I did my thing. And I did a thing for Storm Before the Storm there too. And there's actually a very good similarity, I think, between Carter and Lafayette. Is that one of the things that I most enjoy about Lafayette is he's a pretty good dude, right? He's a pretty good guy. And if you're somebody like me and you do a lot of work in Roman history with Roman political leaders and generals, and you do a lot of revolutionary history with revolutionary leaders and the people they're trying to overthrow who are also not great, you're talking about some of the worst people, just the worst people ever. They're all power hungry. They're all narcissistic. They're all bullies. They're mean-spirited. Like Lenin's a jerk, right? Like whatever else you want to say about him, the guy was a huge jerk. And I never found Lafayette to be that way. I found him to be kind of like a generous, warm, open-hearted person who, if he heard about injustice in the world, would try to make things better. Like he supported causes. He was in favor of prison reform. He wanted toleration for the Protestants. And when you look at I think just like, let's say all the American presidents, if you're going to be somebody who reaches that level of politics, the president of the United States, there's a really good chance you're not a very good person. Even people you agree with politically, right? And I think that Carter is a bit of an exception to that.
Yeah.
My take on Jimmy Carter is that he's a pretty good dude. Does he have, a little bit in him? Yeah, he became president. You don't become president without a little bit in there. And Lafayette had a little bit in there, but yeah, I think a good man, trying to make a go of it.
Well, they said of Lafayette he wanted praise, canine hunger for praise.
Yeah.
That's what Jefferson once said about
Yeah.
him. But
When those guys say those things about Lafayette, like, look, this is the pot calling the kettle black.
Yeah,
man.
exactly. Well, the other thing about
famous. Yeah, so do you.
the other analogy with Carter is often condemned as a failure. He's naive. He's not able to solve big problems.
Lloyd, he wore a sweater.
Yeah. Yeah. He wore a sweater on a cold day.
He wore a sweater on a cold day.
There
He's
was
the worst
somebody.
president in history.
Yes, go ahead. What's the question?
So we have a question here from our colleague Max, and he says, "I'd like to hear Mike address the evolution of Lafayette's approach to being a legitimate opposition to power. Could you address this specifically through the Restoration period?"
Yeah, sure. So Lafayette walks a very fine line where we know that he's not somebody who's going to go out and do rabble rousing and sort of like have people get there. Like if there are people out there with pitchforks and torches, Lafayette is instinctively going to be the person who's like, "Whoa, settle down here, people. Let's actually chill out a little bit." But that said, he's not wholly opposed to what we've been talking about at the end of the Revolution series in the appendices, these irregular solutions to political problems, which is a euphemism for staging a revolution. He runs off to join a revolution in the United States. He's obviously very willing to do a lot of things outside the normal, what we would call the constitutional order in the French Revolution. He is involved in that Carbonari conspiracy against Louis XVIII. So like, how is it that this guy who's like, no, we have to follow these procedures in order to affect change, don't do revolution, but also actually somebody just crossed a line, so now it's time to do revolution. Like, what's that line for him? And I think that the line for him going from regular to irregular comes to at least the things that he wrote in his draft of the Declaration of the Rights of Man, which he considered sort of his own political credo, that if a political society has a constitution, some kind of Bill of Rights, a participatory legislature, access of people into, their checks and balances on the regime, then this is by definition a free society. And that if you try to do an end run around that structure to get what you want, then you are engaging in an illegal insurrection against a legitimate free government. If those things are not in place, if there's not a constitution, there's not a Bill of Rights, there's not a participatory legislature, now you're living in an unfree political society, and it is okay to go into revolt against that. Now, my critique of this would be that this is constitutional proceduralism, that as long as sort of the pieces are in place on paper, that, you know, hey, well, there's nothing else that you can do here because this is the rules of the game. And so you shouldn't do an end run around the Constitution because you're unhappy with the way things are going. But then a lot of people were saying to him things like, you know, but I don't have the right to vote in this system. And he says, but the right to vote exists. Well, that's not a very satisfying answer. But I think that to the question, like how does Lafayette view being in the opposition? He's very willing to be in sort of like what we would call the legitimate opposition, or the loyal opposition, which is somebody who's opposed to the policies of the government but doesn't want to overthrow the government necessarily, and somebody who's willing to go into revolt. He's willing to do both at any given time, as long as certain criteria are met or are found to have not been met.
So what do you think he would say about the January 6th Trumpist revolt?
Oh, I think he would have been on the front lines, man. He would have been like, "Stop the steal," right? No, he's absolutely mortified
He would,
by all of this.
if he could time travel, it would be a difficult.
Yeah, he would have been like, "This is what we didn't want to happen." Yeah, there's no way that he thinks any of that is good. The really interesting question, though, is what happens in a counterfactual where things go a little bit differently, and Trump actually does manage to, like, if the vote totals are a little bit different, and let's say we have him on record leaning on the Secretary of State of Georgia to come up with 30,000 votes to win the state, and then the next thing we know, 30,000 votes actually do show up where he goes through with it, instead of saying like, no, I'm not going to do that, which God bless that man for, you know, having even the slightest shred of integrity. But if Trump is exposed absolutely beyond a shadow of a doubt with having himself stolen the election, and we are sort of outside the constitutional bounds at that point, where is Lafayette at this point? Is he out in front of the Capitol saying, no, now is the time for the people to rise up and stop this kind of tyrannical power grab? Because in that case, it would have been a tyrannical power grab, because I do think that there's a difference between truth and fiction, or truth and lies here. And so that's something that I turn over in my head quite a bit. You know, what does Lafayette think about January 6th? He's just like, this is
That's
terrible.
easy, but what do you do if January 6th succeeds? Then you have another set of questions.
Right.
Yeah. So we'll go, yes, question right here.
When Talleyrand meets Benedict Arnold in a bar in Falmouth, England, do they talk about Lafayette?
Wait, who?
When Talleyrand meets Benedict Arnold in a bar on his way to his
Is this something that happened?
Wait. This is a counterfactual.
Okay.
Talleyrand was.
Oh, it really
I
happened?
haven't written the Talleyrand book. I don't know where he was on any given Tuesday night.
So
Okay.
let me just repeat this for the people
Oh, it's in the
watching at
Duff Cooper
home.
book. Okay, all right.
What happens when Talleyrand meets Benedict Arnold in a bar and they talk about Lafayette? And it really happened?
This is the true
in
thing.
a book.
Yeah, no, it's in a book I read and probably
it's-
recommended that he read, which is a little embarrassing for me that I forget this now. But do they talk about Lafayette?
Yeah, what did they say?
Okay, so Talleyrand thinks Lafayette is a huge joke. That he's not serious. He's hollow. He's somebody who can be played with. You know, Talleyrand politically is working about 10 levels above Lafayette, and Talleyrand knows it. It's not clear if Lafayette knows it. This is why Talleyrand's working 10 levels above him. What do they chit chat about Lafayette? I mean, he probably comes up. It's definitely something they would have had in common. You know, does Benedict Arnold have anything to say about Lafayette? I mean, well, no, they would have agreed that he was easy to beat. Benedict Arnold did great against Lafayette. The time that he was down there, when he was charging around Virginia, there was, you know, that's why Lafayette was sent down there to go hang Benedict Arnold. And Never caught him. Never did anything against
But
him.
Benedict Arnold never caught Lafayette either.
Well,
That was his
yeah,
job.
exactly, right.
So you could say Lafayette outsmarted Benedict Arnold.
But
And
Ben-
who
but by
won
the-
the campaign in the end? Lafayette.
The French Navy.
Well, that's true. After he
I
got,
believe it was de Grasse, sir.
they probably talked about de Grasse.
They probably did.
No. So we're running short on time, but we have another, yes, question back here.
Yeah, and, one of the tools in the Crown of Carolina is the School of Government here. One of the great things they do is they provide education to newly elected officials. That's sort of more of their role. Provide guidance to them to sort of understand how to do the job. I was wondering if we were all able to sort of send Storm Before the Storm to the federal government elected officials. We were actually able to have them read it. What are some of the lessons you wish they would take from that book?
So the question is, we have a great school of government here at UNC. If we could give them advice for the storm before the storm right now, if we could get the storm before the storm in the hands of the school of government, who then are going to talk to people around the state. This is a counterfactual as well, but go ahead.
Why
what do we
not?
do?
That sounds like a great bulk order
Yeah.
that my publisher would be thrilled to hear about. God, it's tough, man, because the storm before the storm is a lot about how nigh impossible it is for two sides who have gone in. Once these sort of norms and precedents stop being broken, and we get into this this not just tit for tat, but you went to here, so I'll go to here, so I'll go to here, so I'll go to here, how intractable that problem ultimately becomes, and how impossible it is to disentangle from it without one side agreeing to step back and kind of lay down their arms, which is almost impossible. And this is one of the things that concerns me a lot, because the storm before the storm is asking, I think, for political leaders to do things that are almost impossible, which is for one side to lay down their arms. Now, I would say, I think that the way that it works, I think that the way that it's dialed back is it can't be Republicans push the envelope and they push it so far, and then Democrats say, okay, we'll let you get away with it, and then we will lay down our arms. There does have to be a measure of the people who have pushed it pushed it too far. They are the ones who are going to have to say, okay, we're the ones who are going to have to step back. There is sort of like the last person who went tit needs to be the one who comes back around. The problem is that if you hang out with me in left-leaning and liberal circles, it's very clear that the Republicans are the ones who are absolutely pushing the constitutional envelope right now, right? Like, to the extent that there's radical revolutionary energy in this country, it's entirely coming out of the MAGA movement, right? They are the ones who are going to destroy the Constitution. They are the ones who are gerrymandering elections. They are the ones who are trying to engineer secretaries of state across the country so that when Donald Trump makes that call the next time around and says, hey, go dig up 30,000 votes, he's going to be saying, no problem, Mr. Trump, that's why I'm here. Right? This is my belief. And so I would advise the Republican Party to lay down their arms to stop this, right? Because it's so obvious to me what is breaking this country, and it is them. But I go over and I talk to my friends who are in the Republican Party, and I have them, right? Because I grew up in an affluent part of Seattle, Washington, and I know lots of Republicans. And I'm friends with huge chunks of my family are Republicans. And they are absolutely convinced that the thing that is breaking this country is radical Democrats who are undermining the social order, who are trying to completely rewrite the codes of society, who complain about how bad Republicans are, but then just do things 10 times as worse. They recently stole the 2020 election, right? We all saw this play out on TV, man, and we tried to stop it. That's why we went to the Capitol. Like, we're trying. So the way that this is going to work is if Democrats, who have been pushing the envelope since the 60s, right? Because this all goes back to the 60s for them. If they are the ones that started all of this, and we're the ones who are trying to turn things back. So as long as the Democrats lay down their arms, everything will be fine. And this is why it's impossible.
So, based on what you've studied with the storm,
we got to go out on a more hopeful note.
That's what I say. Do you think democracy, based on what you know about Lafayette and the French Revolution and the storm before the storm in Rome, do you think democracy can survive in the United States?
Yeah. I think
That's
you
the
can.
optimistic final point.
Yeah, I guess that's it.
All right.
Yeah. Yes.
You heard it. Ladies and gentlemen, Lafayette, we are here. That's what they said. Make the world safe for democracy.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Mike Duncan. This is a great introduction to the book. I hope you will all take the book home,
Yeah.
share it with your friends, and give it to others that you think would enjoy it. Oh, I'm sorry. What? And this is what I recommend.
And this is what I recommend.
Oh my gosh, we're on the same page. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for watching at home. We have to adjourn, but thank you, Mike, for coming to join us. There's a lot more to discuss.